We're going to talk about Native American music right now. And Native American music is a really broad category. So whenever we talk about any kind of a people's music, it's a very big thing. In fact, it would be like if we said, we're going to talk about American music. What does that mean, American music? It could be anything. And in the same way, when we say Irish music or music of South America, I mean, good God, there's so many countries there. What is music of South America? It doesn't tell us a lot when we say, well, this is Chinese music. Well, what kind of music? So typically, when we say Native American music in the United States, we're referring to Native American music of tribal groups in the United States, and often that means what we call Plains natives. So we're going to talk about what all of that means, and first I'm going to start with how do we use and go through the modules for this class. So let's go to our Canvas page and go through this. So the modules are essentially designed so that you can go from the beginning and start here and just keep hitting next to go through some of these load off to different websites. And until you get to the end, and the last thing, so some of these are mentioned in the videos, the last thing we should get to, the videos talking about how do other people perceive Americans, our maps, links to and there's our quiz. It should be the last thing we get to, the music terms quiz. And there's that stuff. So all the assignments are at the end, essentially. And so let's look at week 2 for Native American music. You're going to read the first 2 chapters in the book, and actually this week you're also going to read chapter 4 for the blues. And much of the chapter, and I'll go through what you need to know and what you don't need to know, is stuff that we are not going to cover, although you may find it useful. And in terms of cover, I mean, I'm not going to cover it in this video, and you don't have many of the listening examples. I've chosen different listening examples for you. So we are going to cover the Sioux grass dance. And the reason is, when we talk about the Plains natives, I'm going to show you what that is. In all of your chapters from here on out, you'll have a PDF at the end, near the bottom, that kind of is like a PowerPoint presentation of what I'm going to cover in the videos. So you can go back to this and refer to this during the videos or after. Ideally, if you looked at it before, during, and after, that would be best. So we're going to talk about the Plains natives, although the book certainly covers other natives. And see, we go right through the middle of the country here. I give you here a list of Native American reservations, although interestingly here, from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, they're still called Indian Reservation, and of course, it's still called the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So quickly, what's the difference between Native American and Indian? Well, a lot of people will say that Indian is politically incorrect. And I don't know that it's politically incorrect so much as it is historically incorrect, right? When we talk about India later in the semester, we will talk about how people were sailing from here. Let's zoom out here. People were sailing from Europe to get to India, and they'd have to go all the way from Europe, all the way around Africa, southern Africa, to get to India. And it took forever. And they said, well, what if we just go this way instead? What if we go west? And since they didn't know all this land was here, the theory was we just would go west and it would be a shortcut to India. Well, in moving west, they hit this area, and of course they thought they hit India, which is why they're called Indians, right? The natives here were called Indians, and in many places still are. So I don't know that it's politically incorrect so much that it is politically incorrect. I don't know if it's as much that as it is historically incorrect. So what we still see the term Indian being used in the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Indian reservations, In some places, the preferred term is Indian or American Indian, even, or in the Caribbean, Amerindian. I tend to use the term Native American just because it's more accurate. Um, so um, I think that's all we need to say about that. So these are some of the tribes we're going to be discussing in particular, the Sioux Nation. And of course, back to this, of course, I list this because these tribes were all over here. Here you can see in this map. And once Europeans land in the east and move westward, um, the natives are kind of forced into these reservations. And reservation life, as you'll see in one of the videos, is difficult to say the least. So in this part of the country, we have the biggest reservations, although there's certainly some smaller ones east of here. We have the biggest ones out here. And you can see kind of the lifestyle in one of the videos posted in the module. But we're going to be talking about the Sioux up here, mostly in the Dakotas. I grew up over here, and there were a lot of people that claimed Cherokee heritage, ancestry, and Shawnee ancestry, among others. And so I don't know if that's the same case out here, if people claim any kind of Navajo or Cheyenne or Sioux ancestry. But nevertheless, we're just going to talk about the music, although there are some elements of the culture mentioned in your module. So here are the kind of the terms you need to know. Your book mentions most of these. Vocables, falsetto, powwow, monophonic, repetitive, and call and response. And we'll go through each of these and then I'll show you. All right, so let's get right into the module. And one of the first things you'll notice is that we're talking about music of North America. Well, most of you, if not all of you, are from North America. So how is this world music? And this gets us back to the idea that when we're studying this music, it's music that's typically foreign to you. It represents a group of people. It's often restricted to a certain geographic area and a cultural group. And this kind of fits all of those in those cases. So the first thing is we're going to talk about this particular tune from the text. And we're going to use it as an example, and you can reference the text here for everything. Although interestingly, it says, hey, here's the Sioux grass dance, and the very next page, it's like the Navajo, who lived in a completely different part of the country. I'm not sure why the text has this map. But we'll listen to this. I will point out that many of the pictures here are not in here, but we won't need those. You really just need the text, the word material. So here is a little bit of this tune, and then I'll explain it.
Selection 1, Sioux Grass Dance Song.
So before we go further, let's talk about some of what you're hearing. What this gentleman is singing here, these are called vocables. Vocables are nonsense syllables. They don't have any meaning. And these were typical across Native American music genres. And we don't know exactly why people sang with vocables. We even see them outside of Native American music. But one of the theories that I like is that vocables were used so that different tribes with different languages could get together and still participate in cultural activities. So everybody could sing with these. One of the other things you see is call and response. So the leader sings the phrases and the vocables, and then people repeat it. So you have this call and response idea where one person sings it, everybody sings it back, so anybody can do it. You hear singing in falsetto. Falsetto is the upper register of the male voice. So any kind of very, very high, the highest pitches that in particular men can sing. So we hear vocables, nonsense syllables, we hear call and response. You might think of this as like an echo. We hear falsetto singing, uh, in particular in the drumming, but also in the singing. This music is very repetitious. And that's indicative of that this was probably some kind of folk music designed for anybody to sing and participate in. Although traditionally we think that probably women weren't always allowed to participate in a lot of this music. And finally, this music is monophonic. There's no harmony to it. Although this has female voices in it. Um, Mostly this is men singing. And when this is, so I'm going to show you an example of some people playing one of these drums and singing here at this thing called a powwow. And a powwow, let's go back to our slide, is a modern invention. Um, you might think of it out of necessity. Let's go back to this. As all these tribes get pushed westward and into these reservations, there was almost a need for tribes to get together to try to preserve elements of their culture. It's really an example of acculturation, if you remember that term, where different cultures kind of conflict and try to get along. And there's always an element of one culture trying to preserve some of its ideas in spite of the larger culture dominating. And that's really what happens in a powwow. So the larger culture is physically dominating, but also intellectually dominating, not in terms of people are smarter. I don't mean that way. I mean, it's kind of pushing its values on the less powerful. And so what happens is, and you see this throughout history, is the bigger cultural group tries to enforce its language on the smaller culture, or the less powerful culture, I should say. They try to enforce all kinds of things: the clothing, the food, the music, kind of anything. This is done all the time in the United States. It was done with West African slaves, where they weren't allowed to speak their language. And it was done with Native American groups, pushing the tribes west, pushing them into smaller groups, with the greater European culture influencing these. And so there's almost a need for these tribes to get together, and that's what a powwow is. It's the modern ceremony where the tribes get together and they have food and music and dancing and all that sort of thing. So we'll see an example of that here. And you'll see several people sitting in a circle playing the drum. I should say, by the way, this looks like a Canadian tribe, where here they're not called Native Americans. We see them called First Nations is the term in Canada. So if we Google like First Nations, we often really see the term used around the world, which is Indigenous peoples. But let's get this going. 4, 3, 2, 1. Great example of all these things. The drum circle, the falsetto, the leader starts, everybody responds, the very repetitive drum pattern. So this is a great example of all these sorts of things. We can hear the vocables, the nonsense syllables, the high-pitched singing, just one pitch at a time, no harmony, very repetitive, particularly in the drums. The Native American drum parts very rarely do more than what you just heard. And the call and response, where the leader starts and everyone follows. And the book talks about this in terms of the Sioux grass dance recording that you have. There are a couple of videos in here that talk about the Battle of Wounded Knee, and you can watch those. In particular, the idea of something called the ghost dance, which arose out of. You can look at it two ways. You can look at it sort of philosophically or spiritually, where these tribes were looking for hope in a time when there was none. You can look at it psychologically, where this dance was developed out of sort of the search for some way out of their cultural and physical oppression that they were under. There's all kinds of ways to look at this, but I'll let you look up exactly what the ghost dance was. It's kind of a very sad thing, and watch videos of it actually. Some of the earliest film ever shot, I believe. I have that here. Yeah, some of the earliest film ever shot.
From the Library of Congress in
The
Washington,
Ghost Dance. Of
D.C.
course, there's no sound with this, but you can check this out and listen to the recordings and watch a quick video on life on a reservation. These are all very short videos, just a few minutes, though this one's about 15 minutes. And then finally, so let's go back to your textbook. It covers all this stuff: falsetto, call and response, powwows. And then it has several pages of stuff that we're not going to really cover on, because either these are kind of exceptions to typical Native American music sounds, or they're tribal groups that we're not going to cover because it's outside of the Plains tribe. So we're really restricting ourselves here. But you can read about and look at some of the instruments they made, and there's some notation. We're not going to focus on that at all. So much of the text after the Sioux grass dance, I'm not going to talk about in this video. We're not going to listen to it. I don't have examples of it. We're not going to focus on it. So if you're reading just through the Sioux grass dance, the reading is very brief. And at the end here, they do cover, there's a paragraph or two about Native American popular music. I'm going to cover that here in a second. But most of this chapter, you can kind of glance over. I do want you to read about the Native American flute, because that's still, especially how they call it a revival, that's still a thing. There are websites dedicated to this, and it's the very last thing in the chapter. I really wish they had a summary at the end of these chapters, but nevertheless. So basically the first few pages and the last few pages of this chapter, which you need to look at. There's a paragraph on popular music. I cover, interestingly, the book completely omits this band, arguably the most popular Native American musical group in American history. And they had a big hit. They were big in the 1970s. They had a big hit. So I've got a couple of things on them. These are all short videos. I think this is a 3-minute video. This is a 4 or 5-minute video. So you can kind of watch these and get an idea, if you're not familiar with this, about this group, which brought Native American culture into popular music in the 1970s. And then there will be a quiz posted here. You don't see it here because I need to post it after I make this video. But you'll see a quiz with just a few questions about some of the terms in this chapter. And that's it.